Okay, kia ora, councillors. We're on the live stream, so just so everyone knows, and just a couple of minutes late. Apologies for that. And I know we've got Taff, Dan, and Cameron. Welcome here. So over to you, Dan. Is it Taff? Cam's pointing different ways. Yeah. Oh, good. And then we'll get into it. So thank you. Hand over to you.
Kia ora, councillors. So I'm just going to do a very quick introduction and then hand over to these two gentlemen who know all the detail. But I just wanted to quickly recap because it's been a little while since you would have seen or heard about this before. So you may recall at the Water and Land Committee last year, we brought a paper on drought impact. And we've got a few of our waterways that were running out of water and different actions that were taken as a result of that. And what we then brought back to the first Regional Delivery Committee in October was the Water Scarcity Implementation Framework, which is what sort of operationally we were using in situations when there was a lack of water. But in that conversation, the councillors around the table, you talked about, well, what's the bigger picture? What's the plan, if you like, in terms of water resilience, not just water scarcity, but the whole package. So that's really what we're bringing back to you today, is just a discussion to bring that back to the table, to look at it from a few different angles and see if that is still something that we think is relevant with all of the other changes, and what that might look like if councillors do think that that is something that you want us to pursue. So that's the basis that Cam and Dan are going to sort of run through a few background slides and things, and then open up for conversation with the councillors. Kia ora.
That's good. That's covered the first 3 slides already. That's great. So yeah, as Kathleen was saying, this emerges from those 2 papers last year, where we had a response to the government declaring a drought in March 2024, and a first paper in May about how we were responding to that. And the next paper was very much around, okay, so what is the structure that we put in place to deal with this from an internal perspective? And we did come up with a water scarcity implementation framework. I'll put that up on the screen now. You don't have to read this. It's just giving you an idea that that framework is in place. And what that framework really does is it clarifies our role and how we work with the community in the times of drought or water scarcity, and recognises that there are things that we need to be consistent with in communicating where we can make a difference and where we can't, and how we need to stick to our rules, and what options there are for Environment Canterbury to operate within those. So it's a good framework for us to be using internally. And as Tafflin was saying, we've moved on from that a little bit. From the discussion in October, it was suggested that we look at perhaps a longer term view of water scarcity, and it was suggested that we look at a water resilience strategy. So when we started to do this work, we were going, okay, so what do we need to do? We realised we've got a Canterbury water management strategy now it's about 25 years old now, or 25 years old when you look at it back to where it started, which is in 1998, around how do we mitigate the effects of the 1998 drought and so forth. So that emerged from that time. And so we started to look at this investigation from the perspective of what are the existing strategies and plans in place, taking a look also at the synthesis of national research and international approaches that are out there, and ultimately getting to a point where we can identify information gaps using a bit of a resilience conceptual framework. So I'm just going to step through where we are at with these things today. There will be a question in blue at the bottom of each slide, which will stimulate some interest, hopefully, and some discussion, and I will go back to those questions once I've completed these 5 slides. I'm going to try and talk as little as I can. So we are currently going through reviewing the existing strategies and plans, and of course Canterbury Water Management Strategy is at the top of that. But we also have Climate Change Partnership. We also have a risk assessment behind that. We also have a Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy that is being revitalised at the moment. And in the background, there's a number of other things that we need to consider when we're talking about resilience. And in each of these, there's a really strong consideration of what the impact of climate change is going to be on water supply, and how important water is to each of those aspects. So Braided River Revival Strategy, the energy inventory that we are currently doing with the Mural Forum, which I think is going to come to you in the next month, They all have aspects of where and how water supply will impact on those. So our initial look across all of these strategies suggests that while each of these strategy and plans don't constitute a cohesive framework or for a water resilient strategy, they do, in fact, when you look at them in an aggregated way, do address the issues of climate change and water supply. And so there's a need to kind of think here around what is the need for a resilient strategy when we have a Canterbury water management strategy in place, which has its limitations, granted, and it is old and probably could be reviewed. There are aspects of the water strategy that aren't covered, like, for instance, flood protection or urban water supply are not strong in the Canterbury water management strategy, and they are issues that we need to look at from a resilience perspective as well. And so we're going to continue to work through these strategies and the plans and look at where there is consideration of climate change, water supply and resilience, and then come back to you with where we think we're at with all of these. So the question at the bottom of this is, do we really need a water resilience strategy? And could this be delivered via a refreshed CWMS or a standalone strategy? Now I'm going to step through that and come back to that question because there's a couple of other things I want to cover as well. As we go through the national research, I think one paper really stood out for me so far, and there's a lot to go through, and that is this piece here on water availability and security in New Zealand. This was completed by MPI in 2021, and there's a lot of technical analysis that goes behind this as well, which you'd have to forgive MPI for thinking about this with an economic development focus, but they do, and that's just part of their role. And despite it being an economic focus, it does frame the issue of water security and availability in a more broader sense. And some of the technical analysis goes into where the options for storage might be from an irrigation perspective as well. So interestingly, it identifies that Canterbury has 550,000 hectares of irrigation already, and that the to grow that even further would be quite a challenge when you place an economic or a financial viability lens over that. But that's something in the background. But what I was trying to point to here with this piece of work and in providing you a summary was that there is already strong frameworks for considering water resilience nationally that we should be tapping into. And so the question that goes with this paper is, does this reflect an appropriate framing for a water resilience strategy in your view? Stepping through that, in terms of the water resilience strategy, there's a number of, there are two main ways of looking at resilience. Resilience has often been included in policy frameworks in the last 10 and 20 years, probably more so than ever, with regards to hazard management, floods, climate change. Earthquake resilience is one that's been noted as well. But resilience is often talked about as the ability to bounce back from a shock. And what I think we are really talking about here is the other interpretation of resilience, which is more about the ability to plan and build strength and adapt and anticipate what is coming, and so that we have resilience, and then we've built that resilience. And so that's what I see in this strategy, is not that shock recovery, but more of an idea of where's Canterbury at, what do we need to do to plan for the future. And so I have been using this guiding statement for some of the analysis to date, which is a long-term water resilience strategy is a regional plan or strategy that integrates science, policy, community perspectives to ensure Canterbury's water system remains secure, sustainable and adaptable under increasing pressure from climate change, competing uses and regulatory change. And I think that captures some of the discussion that was had in October and has been a bit of a guiding statement for us. We're also borrowing heavily from the previous study that I talked about, which is what is water security and what is water availability, and ensuring that we've got clear definitions of those as we go through this analysis. So the question here is, do these definitions reflect, particularly the draft statement, does that reflect the intention of a water resilience strategy in your mind? So a final slide, and then we can, second to last slide, and there's some questions at the end, and I'll just skip back to the questions. But what we're trying to do here is, in the third step, so we've got 3 steps to this, which is looking at existing strategies and plans, looking at international and national research, and then trying to identify some of the information gaps. And so we just pulled together a very simplistic conceptual framework for resilience. And you can see there we've got basically an input-output model where we're looking at what's happening on the supply side in terms of rainfall, glacial melt, river inflows, groundwater recharge, whether there's some information or information gaps that we need to identify on the supply side, and also then looking at the demand side, what sort of things have been put in place already regarding water use efficiency over time, but also what are the future challenges that we might face in that with regards to energy demand, population growth, and climate change itself. And so we're trying to use a simple model just to frame the question. So it looks like a physical model, but it's very much just to help us frame the questions around what are the information gaps. Ultimately, of course, when you talk about supply and demand, from a water perspective, there's the middle bit, which is capacitance or storage. And when I talk storage, I know it conjures up the idea of irrigation storage, but we really need to think broadly about what storage means from a regional perspective, whether it's natural storage through wetlands, lakes, groundwater aquifers, or whether it is actually storage for alternate uses, whether that be irrigation or community drinking water supply, or to augment biodiversity outcomes as well. So while this is quite a kind of binary model, we are trying to think a lot broader than just the physical system itself. And so that leads to some questions about the future for this project. We would like to come back to you and propose options rather than advance work on a water resilience strategy at this stage. And some of the questions that have been that have conjured up from the analysis to date are more about who would own this strategy. The strategy needs to be more than a document, and we've learnt that through the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. That was a strategy largely focused on water augmentation, but it was also about community engagement as well. So if we do develop a resilience strategy, what level of community and government and industry engagement do you want to see? What sort of leadership needs to be behind this, whether that's Mayoral Forum or council? That will depend on whether this is a council or a Canterbury strategy. What sort of time frame horizon would you like to see this developed around, and would you like to see the strategy in place to inform the long-term plan for 2027? So they are more kind of process questions around how you would like to see this developed. But I will just step back to the initial questions and we can just open the floor for questions around the first one, which is about, do we need a water resilience strategy? Thank you.
Cool. I've got John and then Genevieve. Vicky.
I guess simply for me, the answer to that question is yes, and let's carry on.
Genevieve?
Yes, we do. Is there ability to discuss this at some point? Can I?
Yeah, now.
Can I talk? Okay. I'm just talking about water scarcity, which will increase tradable value of water in a scarce region, and my concern is listening to this sounds like storage, which is all very well and good so long as it's equitable and isn't used to just drive water as a trading commodity, and that's my concern as I read this. So yeah, just talking about preferential allocation would be a key element of it. And the ability to, restrict particular activities in a time of scarcity and actually have preferential allocation, hence that. And the ability to actually reallocate water based on the needs, equity or environmental limits. So once again, it's brought back to council like it used to. We used to look at allocation and consents, a bit like the fisheries quota system. It becomes privatised, and that's not what water's about. So as long as it's real fundamentally community-led, not just, that's my main thing.
Thanks, Genevieve. Vicky? I've got Vicky, Nick, Jan, Peter, Ian.
When I was looking through this, I thought in terms of that water scarcity implementation framework, sort of comes across to me in there as like a thinking just specifically about the response to a drought year, like, and a lot of thinking about the emergency responses and those sorts of things, which I know are important. But I just check? I mean, we are talking, if we're talking about a water resilience strategy, we're talking about it holistically in the whole, considering sort of like the water inputs that there are during the wetter years in order to build resilience for the dry years. Like, we're not just talking about these periods where we have shortage. And seeing nods. So that type of approach, I totally support, that we need to do that. There is mention, I did go and have a look at the report that you gave us for homework, and which is actually, it was a really interesting one. And I note that Canterbury doesn't come into the top 10 to be looked at by in that report. We don't come up in the top 10. And the reason being that there's a high likelihood, or my reading of it is the high likelihood of water quality constraints. So that, that's a really big issue. And in a climate impacted world with, higher, longer drought periods, more warm days, etc., the impact of poor water quality on our ecosystems is only going to be increasing. Things like formidum, for example. I think it needs to be a really big conversation about how all the different angles, whether we're, I would be concerned if we looked at it in the world of this is going to be dairy, long run in with dairy through a climate changing world, because I'm not sure that that's necessarily a good assumption to make. I think there's plenty we can do around changes in water demand and the way we use water. The potential evapotranspiration deficit is massive. So I looked, we've got about 500,000 hectares of irrigated land. If our potential evapotranspiration deficit is 100 mil, which is what it talks about in here, that's like 500 million cubic meters more water needed every year just to stay where we are. That's absolutely massive, and bits of managed aquifer recharge are not going to put that level of water back into our system. It's another 10% of water application of what we've currently got allocated, which I understand we don't actually use all of. So it might be like applying another 20% on top of what we currently use if we're using about 50% of what's allocated. So I think we've got some really big thinking to do and some big numbers to crunch through. And ultimately, the bottom line is that the ecosystem cannot adapt in the way that humans can. And so we need to really understand what our ecosystems need in these stress times to get through, and then work backwards from that. So I suspect we're going to be needing to really look closely at what's currently allocated and then work back from that. And so one of the questions I have is, with irrigation, like to gain the increased reliability, which we need for some of the land use change, which Councillor Sunkel's talked about before, like maybe do we need to diminish the amount of irrigated area in order that we can use the water we currently have available in a smaller area to build the amount of reliability that we have, for example. So I think we need to start asking some really hard questions through this. But absolutely, there's so many questions to ask and so much data we need. It's a big piece of work, whether you can do all that. You can put budgets together for it for the next long-term plan, definitely. And then I think it's quite a big piece of work thereafter. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Nick?
I do support, sorry, I'm just getting my thoughts, but I do support further work being done on this. And I mean, I have been involved in, looking in my old farming area, securing water, and that was for all things, including the community, enhancing rivers, industry, and irrigation. And I mean, we all know that, from my own farming experiences, and others will agree with us, a lot of us are only actually using 50% of our allocation. But, in those dry years, it's always nice to have a little bit more. But I think, we do need to look at more storage, and it's not all about just for intensive farming. It's also for our communities and for maintaining adequate flows in our rivers. I'm a little bit concerned when some councillors talk about the reallocation of consents and water. I mean, I think it's a real grey area, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. And no, thank you.
Thank Jane.
Kia ora koutou. Just to agree with we need this. This has to happen. It's just probably in the sense of the time frame. 30 years. If it's multi-generational, kind of, that's what kind of we're thinking at. Similar to our braided river stuff. Do we go 100 years? I don't know. I'm just thinking more just into 30-year horizon. And you've got here informed the LTP 2027. Is that the fastest you can do it, or in a sense of what's I mean, that in sense of the process at the moment, the long-term plans, it's probably a good process, but who knows where we're going to end up in this government, and other thing, where regional councils will end up. What's the fastest you could do it?
That's a great question. Through you, Chair. It depends on the scope of this, because, of course, this was kind of raised as something for investigating, but it hasn't been built into any annual plans or long-term plans at the moment. But, what part of the question up here is, could this be delivered via refresh CWMS, or should it be a standalone strategy? And they would impact on the budget. And I'll just make a quick, in timeframes, a quick point on that one. Because there has been a lot of work with regard to the CWMS of late, particularly with regard to reviewing the zone committees and proposed local leadership groups, which the Mayoral Forum considered at the end of May. And if anything, that really kind of re-energised mayors behind how they engage with the community on water management issues. And so there's kind of at each of those meetings and within the working groups as well, it was really kind of a hearty debate in that space. And the Mayoral Forum has also talked about whether the targets need to be kind of re-looked at some point, potentially kind of after we get more direction from central government, because that will impact it. And so there's another kind of opportunity there to really look at the CWMS. So I'd be kind of really thinking, is this another opportunity to, or a catalyst to look at the CWMS at some point in the future, and not too far away, to really make sure that CWMS remains fit for purpose. And because the CWMS has always been about managing water, essentially, and what we're talking about here, again, is managing water.
Cool. So as we respond, like, do we want it? Might be good to consider that second question as well. But so we can come back to people who have already spoken, but we'll carry on. We've got Peter, Ian, Claire, and Dion.
I'm always a bit cynical around strategies, and especially high-level ones, from a regional perspective. And the reason for that is that strategies will always be overwhelmed by community desires. So, the best strategy in the world, and therefore it depends how it comes through. So I think it would have to be a statutory process that looked at resilience. Community desires are always overwhelmed by opinions, and then we end up doing nothing. My personal belief on this is that it should be linked to the things that are really important and will be really important for us going forward. And you already mentioned the fact that we are doing an energy stock take for Canterbury. So I think one of the things that needs to be aligned to is an energy strategy for Canterbury. And we talked about food strategy for Canterbury. So how do we ensure that the things that we're doing and the decisions that we're making lead to the fact that we can actually feed ourselves? So that's one thing I think we need to be looking at, and I've thought that for a long time. And the other thing that's probably not as palatable if you're in the rural area is an amenity strategy. So we know that the amenity value of water is huge. I'm not saying that just because Peter's sitting there in the background, but it is huge in terms of tourism. People come to Canterbury to see the lakes and to enjoy those opportunities around the rivers and other things. And I think that we're remiss in terms of we don't take that into account. And I know that the CWMS, we had that it was a target within the CWMS. So there are some really good things in there that we need to carry forward. But I think attacking it from just hey, we need water resilience. Everyone understands we need that. Everyone does. I mean, if you look at our water storage that we have now across Canterbury, which is an absolute asset to the region and the way that's been put together by the people that have put it together, it doesn't mean that that will always go to be producing milk, but it's there. It's an infrastructure that can serve us well in the future. So I'm just a bit cautious about that. To me, it's a wee bit too high up the tree to actually have a crack at, because you've already heard differences of opinion on what we should be taking into account. So I think we need to be looking at it from a point of view that for future planning documents or omnibuses or whatever we do in terms of planning and the way we use water across Canterbury, we should be taking those things into account on a more of a statutory basis than what we are. And we've already said that we're moving to freshwater management units, and those communities will have different views on what's important to them, as opposed. So Kaikoura will be totally different to Waihao, for example. And so that's my opinion on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Ian?
Can I just make the comment that MPI report is an interesting document for its mainly for its misunderstanding of the dynamics of the use and storage and resilience and availability of water, and for them to suggest that the Canterbury has the lowest return on capital of investing in resilience and water availability and what's the other word? Availability and security belies the facts. And when you look at the amount of investment that's gone in from moving from run-of-river to on land storage to supply water, and the equation that the RDR will quote, which is they went from I think 70% use of their water is for irrigation, or 80% of their water for irrigation, 20% for hydropower. That's pretty much totally flipped to now 30% of the water is used for irrigation and 70% is used for hydropower, using exactly the same water resource. And that's all based on investment in a fully allocated, in a region where things are fully allocated. And the MAR project, as you mention in the slides on page whatever it is, those 3 green slides, it was going to be an attempt to use groundwater, which of course is ultimately it's a huge reservoir of reserve water. And when you look at those 3 slides, the supply side, storage, demand side, I mean, when I was involved, well, we still am, unfortunately, the Ashburton Community Water Trust, we set out to answer those 3 questions on behalf of Canterbury. And that's when Brian Jenkins was the CEO, and he set up the regional committee specifically to answer those questions after the Ashburton Community Water Trust had actually done the equation on the supply side and demand side for part of the Canterbury Plains. And that's critical information that this regional council should be involved with. So should we be revising and reviewing the information that came out of that regional committee when it was actually answering these questions? Absolutely yes. Should this council be updating that to the modern dynamics? Absolutely yes. One of the big new dynamics is with the increase in population that's coming into Canterbury, and I think the South Island's got the biggest population growth, not all of it in our region, but a fair bit of it's in our region. The demand for water for a variety of uses, not just for irrigation, is going to be huge. And as everybody said, if we've already got a high proportion of the land that could be irrigated, is irrigated, then actually the demand for more irrigation is probably getting. We are in the area of diminishing returns. But in terms of supplying water for other uses, industrial use, resilience for urban growth, potentially hydrogeneration, potentially maintaining flows in a changing climate in our rivers for environmental flows and fish life and those sorts of things, that demand is likely to grow. So I think the MPI report is the sort of report I'd expect out of Wellington, with a lack of understanding of the real dynamics that people from Canterbury could have brought to that report. I think there is a requirement probably to, and I was a bit sceptical when I saw this on the agenda, but I think there is a requirement to revise these three slides, the supply side, the storage and demand side, what that might look like, and then see what that might bring. And I don't think that needs to be an expensive exercise, because a lot of that expertise is actually sitting out there. The people who were involved in that Canterbury Regional Committee originally, some of that science is not hard to equate. The irrigation schemes have a very good view on, availability of water, what the economics of investing in storage looks like. So answers some of those questions MPI poses, or Dan, you posed in your preamble. We need to think about that.
Thanks, Pete.
And look, I in terms of Vicky and Genevieve's concerns, I think you need to think about in a volatile climate, and it's not obvious we're short of water at the moment. It's not obvious that climate change is bringing us a drier, hotter climate. Overall, I mean, we've already had nearly 100% of our rainfall in the first 5 months of this year for a 12-month average. And everybody's saying that's climate change. Well, so climate change is going to be volatile. The way to deal with volatility is to have resilience and security, whether that's financial volatility or economic or climatic volatility. And thinking about how we can smooth those bumps is pretty critical to the ongoing health and wealth of this region. And this isn't about farming, and it's not about irrigation. This is about the overarching resilience of the region.
Thanks, Ian. Claire?
Look, I'm not going to repeat what Councillor McKenzie said, because I generally agree pretty much with that. But look, through you, Chair, I really do want to thank staff for bringing this. This is what I wanted to see. So I'm pretty pleased with how you've presented this. I particularly like, Dan, your draft statement. I think that's encompasses certainly what I would like to see, but I just note that it's pretty hard, and I guess we've heard some views here at the table. How do we reconcile opposing views of people who think that the water we've got today is all that we're going to have in the face of increasing energy demand, increasing population, and, obviously, be it economic growth from whatever way, or driving land change, for examples, with those that perhaps have got a more visionary view to the future about how we actually might get that resilience, which has been articulated here today. So it was interesting when when I saw the slide about does the CWMS need to be looked at. It probably does from some targets, but I wouldn't definitely want to throw them out and look at them. And if I was to support that, I would be wondering how you actually would put that concept of the resilience in there. Well, it wouldn't be a concept. I mean, it's obviously going to have some direction. So I'm a yes, yes, and yes. I think it needs to be a wider conversation if we're going to go forward with this. I'm probably a little bit like Councillor McKenzie. I don't know how much funding and whether you've got enough in your pocket at the moment to just keep working on this, because I think that you've started off at a great place, and I just like some continuing thought and some work going in to come back. And I think your next steps is, well, a council decision later, which I presume is to approve some sort of process. So yeah, I'm pretty supportive of where we're at the moment.
Dan?
Yeah, just quickly, I think what we're trying to do is kind of contain the scope of this. Like, it could go really wide. And in that regard, I think we're kind of erring on the side of the idea of taking a look back at the information that underpins the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, as Councillor McKenzie was saying. And I think that's probably a good starting point. I think that's probably, like someone else is saying, that's more of a desktop research. We've probably got a lot of that information already. The National Science Challenges delved into that quite a lot as well. So there's a lot of work to do, but it's and whether that requires additional budget, we probably could contain that within just an initial piece, which would take us to a council decision as to, based on the information update we have, and we present to you in maybe a few months' time, whether we actually do need a strategy to deal with that refreshed information. And I think that's where we're at the moment. Thank you.
So I think for me, this is not about irrigation. This is about getting that resilience in, as Councillor Mackenzie pointed out. So, you know, I don't think we need to be digging down into preferential allocation and restricting water use and that sort of stuff, because it's not just about droughts. It's about, if we've only got so much water to use, how do we actually get some extra security and resilience into the system? So, yeah, I don't want it to go too wide, but I do think that we as Canterbury need to have that conversation. So.
Thanks, Claire. Dion?
Thanks. A lot of what I wanted to discuss has been covered, which is awesome. I think the strategy that the presentation's really good. One thing I wanted to ask is, when we had the Regional Economic Development Summit with Shane Jones here, water storage was a big topic and something he's very hot on, and he was alluding to a lot more enabling for water storage everywhere in the RMA changes. So have you seen anything coming through these changes that are kind of going to enable this anyway? And then the question would be, how do we then make sure it's in the right place in the right time? And
through you, Chair, we had exactly that conversation yesterday, and the need to kind of dive into what we're seeing from the national direction, but we haven't crossed it over yet. But we're looking forward to a briefing later today from Olivia Cook, and that will be the kind of first step of it. But that would be part of the next bit of analysis.
No, that's really good, because I think that would inform where my thinking will go. At the moment, I'm thinking, yes, we need a strategy that probably integrates everything, but it not necessarily as a standalone, but a standalone might be an impact. But I was also thinking that if we go down those leadership groups, this type of work could be something that they can themselves, within their catchments and whatever those boundaries may be, can start to look at in the frame of the CWMS and the outcomes and everything. But I'm really cognizant of the government really wants to see more water storage, and my question will be, okay, that's cool, that might solve the resilience issue, but if it's a free-for-all, is it in the right place? And are we doing it for the right reasons? Because, you know, we've got to think of the glaciers are melting, there's different land uses, people may want to change farms and turn them into forests, or, you know, dare I say it, they might want to put data centres in, you know, convert from a farm to a data centre, and they need a different use of water. So there's a whole different way that we kind of need to think about water, not just in terms of growing food and farming and everything like that. But I think that question that I asked first would be where I'm at.
Oh, no, only if you've got a response.
I think if we look at the Canterbury Water Management Strategy and its genesis, and look at where it got to in terms of water storage, I think it paints an interesting story that we need to draw from as well. We need to learn from where that has got to. And also the number of proposals for irrigation storage that we've looked at over the last 25 years, and how many of those have gone ahead, and what are the reasons for them not going ahead. I think that's an important part to think about in terms of that middle component of the diagram, the storage bit. Why does storage not go ahead, and what are the constraints to that? So I think that would be in the mix, definitely. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. Grant?
Thanks, Dan. Just looking at the CWMS, Cam, your comment, you know, the vision was there, and it had those 10 targets. I think if we're going to go forward with a resilience strategy, it needs to look at the environment and the health of the environment as the priority. What do we not want to use? What does our environment need to sustain itself in a variable climatic situation, but a warming one? What does that mean for our aquatic organisms? What does that mean for our indigenous vegetation? Councillor Scott mentioned the need to ensure that there is enough water in the system for recreation and amenity values, because that is a huge income generator for Canterbury's GDP, and those sorts of things. You know, the 10 targets are really important. It does give the first, second order priorities, primary principles, supporting principles, looking at those, to me, the supporting principles are kind of like being subdued a bit. In fact, they needed to be uplifted to ensure that we are not just looking at water usage, but it is what's the health of for our part of the planet, if you like. The CWMS at Annex 3 in the document talks about infrastructure options related to storage for mid-Canterbury, North Canterbury, and obviously that hasn't really gone here. But the underlying thing, just looking at one of the bullets, is the future development of Canterbury's water resources will require strategic integrated water resource management, which is what you're going to look at again, or a bit more. That seems to be the thing. So So for me, it is looking broader than just water. It is land use activity. Water needs the priority for me, I think, needs to be the consideration of the environment. The flows in our rivers can't diminish. What do we need to do? Do we need to change land use? Look at allocation, reduce allocations in some areas. I am concerned about on this, the idea of managed aquifer recharging stuff. What is that saying to us? That's saying that we have an unhealthy groundwater, and is our land use activity polluting our land to a point where we can't continue to pour water down a hole in the ground to try to support that underground system for drinking water or whatever. Those sort of things. What is the research? And I think your idea of just doing recapping on where we've come from and what are the learnings for that are going to be really important going forward. And climate change will provide some direction over time for where is the best fit place for land use change. And I'm kind of referring to the Going with the Grain document from the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, which talks about we have to go down that track. And part of that will be making sure that water usage, water quality issues are taken into account. And just more recently, we've been talking about how do we move forward with the Canterbury Zone Committee structure. We have freshwater management units, which really, give them another name, they're sort of catchments, which will have multiple sub-catchments. So if you took a view of water resilience at a more localised, almost sub-catchment scale, you're actually allowing some places that will be wetter, some places that will be drier, but there's not necessarily a common solution throughout Canterbury, because it will be highly variable. So look, I mean, I could keep going, but I think it's really good. It is needed. It does need to be broad. It does need to involve the community, because a lot of there'll be multiple values that come through that.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Grant. Look, I know I've had 4 people who have already spoken put their hand back up, so I'm conscious of that. Greg, you haven't spoken. David, you haven't spoken, so I'll give you the chance. And anyone else who hasn't. And then I'm conscious of time too. I know we've got 15 minutes left. There was other questions, but I think we've had a chance to at least give initial feedback on the idea, which we might only get to today. But look, we'll just go to the other councillors first, and then we'll use the time we can if those people have other questions. And hopefully you've been thinking about the other questions that are in the presentation, and we can get to them hopefully. So Greg.
Yeah, I will be brief. I'm really only looking at one of the particular questions, which is on that synthesis of national research and international approaches. I just thought the piece of reading that you gave us as homework, the full name of it is Water Availability and Security in Aotearoa, New Zealand, Supporting the Sustainability, Productivity and Resilience of the Food and Fibre Sector. So, yes, I'm all for a strategy, but clearly it needs to be a lot broader than that. In my opinion, I thought Grant started to move into where the environment itself and the needs for that. So, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Greg. David?
Thanks. Generally, I'm not a great fan of strategic planning. I often see a lot of them ending up as what I call shelf documents. We drag them out periodically to maybe give ourselves a pat on the back or revise what's done before. But having said that, I'm conscious of the fact that we spend a lot of time and money in developing these strategies and plans, and I think I'm probably more inclined to support a revised Canterbury water management strategy plan, perhaps broaden the scope of that to incorporate a lot of what's been spoken today. I'm particularly supportive of the comments from Councillors Mackay and Mackenzie, and think that we could develop an all-encompassing strategy around the CWMS that we already have in place at the moment, and rather than reinventing the wheel, I think we could expand upon that quite substantially and save ourselves a reasonable amount of time and money, not having to go back over a lot of ground. So yes, I'm supportive of that, and I'm very much of the opinion that water is the blood of life for the world, and particularly in our district. And I really think that it's a prime function of this organisation, and we need to be probably developing an all-encompassing policy around that CWMS strategy to reflect the importance of that commodity to the Canterbury area. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Joe or Paul, would you like to speak? You don't have to, but just giving you the opportunity. No? Good. Look,
good. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. It's been good to hear other councillors. Seems like you got a resounding yes from most people. I think there is, I haven't actually thought much about revising the CWMS before, because I actually thought that our previous strategy was to do the integrated planning and to bring the CWMS through that. But I can see that that's potentially not going to happen because of the RMA changes. Or it's going to be a lot different than what we thought it might be. So I do think that the CWMS offers the wider values that some councillors have mentioned, or everyone's mentioned it actually. So I think that is a pretty good idea. My only caution is that I think it could get pretty big once we open that up, but I don't think that's a reason not to look at it. I think there's a lot of good stuff there that you could build on and build this into a revised, refreshed CWMS, but I also still think that has to be linked to whatever statutory plans do come forward. So there needs to be a real meshing of those going forward. Because but like Peter, I agree that you need that statutory bit at some point, not for all issues, but for some. So I think that's really important. And of course, like people have mentioned, it's got to be about environment as well. So I like the bit in the storage box that there's natural storage as well, or you could construct natural storage as well. It doesn't have to just be about irrigation and or energy. Like what Dion said too, there's other potential future uses of water that need to be considered. So yeah, that's sort of my feedback. I think it's a good idea how you can link that in, build it into the CWMS, and now that is probably an important vehicle for us, noting that there's going to be a bit of instability in the RM system for a bit about what plans actually look like and how they go forward. I think it's not a bad idea. And I know I've got John, Genevieve, Vicky, Peter and Ian that want to have a quick say again. So there's 9 minutes left, people. So be quick. and be fair to those other 5. So there you go.
Thanks. And I guess I just said yes the first time. It's on reflection of the conversation, having come through the CWMS, that I don't want to conflate zone committees with CWMS. And given that real bulk of work that was done in those original phases around storage and water security, there's in my mind, just what others have said, there's a real core base of work that we could build on without having to reinvent a wheel. And I just reflect back to a past iteration of this council where Councillor Farn and myself would challenge each other occasionally in ideological spaces. But one thing that we absolutely agreed on was the need for water storage. And what water storage and resilience gave, yes, it was production, but there were amenity values, there were urban values. We had about 5 of them, and we sat there and absolutely agreed that we needed to look further into what storage and resilience looked like, so from a previous iteration. And I would hate us to put too many caveats around what we look at or how we look at it. We need to understand what resilience looks like across those metrics of environment, people, communities, production, agriculture, resilience. Thanks.
Vicky?
I thought it was Genevieve next. Was it?
Oh.
But if you're right, okay. Yep. So
I'm just changing the order.
In terms of the time horizons, 30 years seems to me too short. I think this is a big, especially when you look at the sums of money. If you're starting to talk about storage and thinking about dams, like the amount of money that gets poured into those in the billions, 30 years doesn't seem nearly long enough to really consider that. Just to the point about it being about not all about irrigation, just to a reminder, so irrigation schemes use or have consent for around 5,200 million cubic metres of water per year, based on some data that was given a few years ago, which is about 96% of the consumptive use of water. Water supply schemes for communities is 4%. It's around 200 million cubic metres of water per year. So just to make sure, the scale of irrigation and the water taken for irrigation is absolutely vast and blows all other uses out of the water. It's not to say it doesn't have value, but in terms of scale, it is massive. And so we need to make sure we keep our eyes on where the core area of interest and how that operates and what we do with the water, or what the water can be used for, and how we build resilience in there whilst protecting our environmental values. That is the key issue. That is the biggest issue. I think that's basically the main thing. Just on the supply side, double accounting, it seems like there's a lot of suggestion that there's rainfall, there's snow melt, there's inflows from the rivers, there's groundwater recharge. That's all snow and rainfall. So just to be really clear, we can't make it look like we've got more than we have by adding different types of things where it's all water and rainfall and snow. So just being really clear. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Genevieve?
Don't worry, I'll be quick. I just think the fundamental thing is we've got to look at the 4 well-beings within the LGA. If we plug those in and make sure they're really strong in it, I think we'll get somewhere a bit more equitable than what is currently there. We can't forget also, the cost of storage. The cost of storage of water for certain purposes is extraordinary. We also need to look at, I guess what you'd call it, as a reservoir from the south, where I come from, for community only, where it's clearly, and down south it's elevated, but it's a natural reservoir for home or drinking supply. But with regards to what Vicky was saying as well too, we need some sort of resilience, because from calculations I did over the last couple of days, we're 97% allocated of water at the moment. We do need some sort of legal framework within it that enables clawback for efficiency and for other uses. We just have to as the future goes on. So just looking at all the different water zones, I mean, most of them are fully or over allocated, and Waimakariri is nearly there. So we've got to do something swiftly, but I think if we look at the 4 well-beings, we need to really work out what comes first.
Just to very briefly reflect on those three slides again, I would suggest that you've got the supply side and the demand side, and the box in the middle isn't, and you've then got where we can influence most, where we can influence least. I disagree with those. I think you're predetermining and showing old-fashioned thinking there. The middle box is actually where the strategy sits. So you need to do the equation of supply and demand, and what demand might look like in the future, and grow in urban use and various other things. There's a temporal difference between supply and demand. That's critical. And then the middle box is actually where any resilient strategy may or may not sit, which is what can we do? What can we, how do we, can we do storage? Can we do this? Can we do that? And and at the various times of the year to match supply and demand and growing demand. That's where we need to think about things.
Thanks, Ian. Peter.
Yeah, I was just addressing those other questions that you had up there about, going back. So the regional leadership, I think strongly regional leadership. We've seen back earlier in my time when Meridian were looking with the Hunter Downs deal that was going to actually take some pressure off some rivers, some lowland rivers up the coast, put some water into the lake, the wetland down there, Wainono, and actually get all the way to Timaru. We saw some selfish resilience there from TAs who said, "Oh, that's a great idea for regional development, but we're quite happy doing what we're doing." And then you went and saw like TDC go and spend $20 or $40 million taking more water out of a river that was over allocated. And they could have changed the paradigm there. So I think my idea would be this is a 30 to 50 year deal. I'm not too sure whether it should be part of our 2027 LTP. Maybe if we get some more concise thinking around this from your desktop study, Dan, then we can actually just decide what we actually are looking for in terms of funding. So yeah, I think it's really good. Well done. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Just coming back to those last questions, we haven't really had time to look at them, but I think it's going to need engagement for sure, especially if we do make the call to relook at the CWMS stuff, and of course that would take care of the second question too a little bit, because you'd have to involve the Mayoral Forum if we do that. But of course I think we should be front and centre of that process, as we have been with the Zone Committee review, etc. So I think that goes without saying. The time frame, you've heard from some councillors that maybe it's a 30, 50 and 100. You have a look at different time frames. I know the further you go out, the harder it is to predict what may happen, but I think it's worth stretching those horizons. And I think in terms of the last question, you've heard that, probably, but can we do it sooner? Can we look at next year's annual plan, for example, rather than waiting for the 27 LTP to start a process? So that's sort of good feedback, I think. So thanks and Taff, hand to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say next step. So thank you. We've heard a lot today, which has been really helpful. And thank you. I think it was Councillor Mackay who brought this up in the first place. So appreciate that. So what we're thinking is we'll consolidate all of what we've heard and all of Dan's great work behind the scenes, but also remembering that we do have the Runanga Reset Huis that we've been doing. We've got, we did a lot of work around the RPS, albeit paused, but around Pick a Path and What's Your Future. So we have got a lot of community input as well. So there's a whole heap of information. So we're thinking next steps would be to come back and do another workshop with this council with some advice. So we can actually start to explore a few things, and then that would give us a narrower scope then to come in with, could we do something sooner? What might that look like? And explore some actuals in that next one. So if that works for councillors, then we can proceed on that basis.
Thank you.
And I'm just committing these two to doing that.
Yeah, thanks, team. Can I go to? I know we're on to our next session when our guests have arrived. So, but maybe if councillors just want a quick stretch, stand up,